I can't do this video without giving you a little bit of the boost. So let's go ahead and do a second through third pull. Man, I love this car. It's so simple and it's not super fast, but man, it's just an all-around great setup, and cruising around with the Targa off, can't beat it. So behind me is an Anthracite Supra that I just picked up, and right now in this condition, it's actually already finished. I already T56 swapped it. So this car had an R154 in it, and it was really clunky to drive. It had broken first gear, but I put the ultimate setup in this car. So this has my new aluminum bell housing in it. So my GR700A kit. It has the Tilton ST246 twin disc that has both organic full face disc with springs in both discs. So it's a dampened setup, and it actually makes the car really quiet. So this car is like the ultimate street car setup, and this setup is good for like any car from 600 to 1,000 horsepower. This clutch can handle it, but it also street drives almost like a stock clutch. It is really an incredible clutch to drive and use. Like, this is the most quiet trans setup I've ever put together, and it's really a combination of the bell housing and the ST246 clutch that has the sprung disc in it. It makes everything almost like stock, like as far as noise goes. So I'm gonna take it down here really low again in RPM, and then I'm in fourth gear now. Oh yeah, and check this out. Look how tight the shifter is. There's no play in there. It's not like there's nothing, man. It just, everything is so, I don't know, this is damn near a perfect setup for me. But there you can hear a little bit of noise. But man, it is not anything bad. Like, it's not like your typical multi-disc clutch setup. This thing is like dead silent. Super happy with this overall. So this car has almost 100,000 miles on it, but it is pretty clean as far as the interior goes, but it does have its issues on the outside, like some rust. But I'm going to show you a little more in detail on that. This car is going to be a project for the shop. We're going to make this like maybe 1,000, 1,100 horsepower, but also keep it super streetable. So it's going to be a really nice street car, and we're going to fix it up, fix all the little problems with it. The trans has already been taken care of. Next up is probably going to be over the winter, we'll do paint and some body work and fix the rust. And then over the winter also, I'm going to do a 3.4 motor in this, so a stroker motor with probably something like a 76mm turbo on it as well. So this trans that I put in here will still hold up to that kind of power level. The GR700 is good for, 1,000 horsepower roughly in a Supra, because the torque is a little bit lower and they're a little bit lighter than 4,000 pounds. So like the T56 Magnum is good to like 700 torque in a 4,000 pound car. So the Supra is about 3,500 pounds. So, you have a little more leeway there as far as the torque capacity. So most cars that I have with the GR700 are anywhere from like the 600 to 1,000 horsepower range, maybe even 1,100 for some of the guys that want to take the risk of hurting the trans. But honestly, we've really, knock on wood, we've never really had any major problems with trans so far. I've never really had any broken gear sets at all. It's kind of crazy. Welcome to Grandis Racing. Here is what we got going on, and you can see on the lift there is a new addition to the shop. So this is an anthracite car I picked up from Schenectady, New York, which is upstate New York, last night, and it's on the lift now. I was just inspecting it, checking out some rust issues that are on it. But this is going to be a new project car, so we're going to do some really cool stuff with this car. I have some really big plans for this car. It's going to be just a street machine, and it's going to be tailored for response, but big power, but also being able to hook up on the street. So that car is going to be used as a test bed here for some Grandis Racing products, for some R&D. But let's go take a look at it, and I'll show you some of the problem areas and some of the things that are going to be addressed over the next year as I do this build on this car. So the car is really dirty right now. It needs a cleanup. It's been sitting outside for quite a while up there. But the one thing that you can't really see in the pictures that I posted was some issues with rust here. And so this is a northern car, so that's what I was worried about. But he showed me the pictures of the rust, and I knew what I was getting into when I was buying it. So I knew there was going to be some body work involved. So there you can see the rust where the fenders were rolled, and then there's some rust down here on the back of the lower quarter. And then here you can see the rust has actually gone through. So we'll need to remake this out of some sheet metal. It's not a big deal, it can all be fixed. The subframe is pretty rusty, but we know, I know someone that makes a subframe for these things, so maybe that will go in there. And then, like I said, here's some more rusty spots. But that quarter on the driver's side is pretty bad, but the passenger side isn't quite as bad. It won't need as much work. But overall, the body is in pretty good shape, and it's anthracite, so that's what matters. You know, monkey shit brown, one of the most desirable colors, in my opinion, for these cars. It's one that I've always wanted, so when I saw it pop up for sale, it was something I had to have. Now, one of the other things that is in this car that needs to come out is it has an R154 and it is broken. So first gear is totally shot and reverse is grinding. And I think the grinding in reverse is just due to the clutch doesn't seem like it's being disengaged fully by the hydraulic system. So this trans is gonna come out, it's gonna get T56 in it. One thing I'm gonna do with this car is I'm gonna try to replace this trans in one day, basically. So I'm gonna pull this one out, put the T56 in, get it all up and running and going in a day. Someone has all the parts in stock. I don't know why. It's almost like this, the guy that owns this place deals in transmissions. But anyway, we'll have this trans out and back up and running in a couple hours. As far as the motor in this thing, it is pretty wet underneath. Power steering is leaking everywhere. Oil leaks. So this thing's just gonna need a total overhaul. It's got a lot of eBay parts on it too, like eBay intercooler. The header is an eBay header. So I'll put the car down off the lift and we can look at it from the top side, look at the motor. Taking a quick glance at the interior, it's actually really nice. The interior is in really good shape. That's one of the things I'm kind of picky about is a well-kept interior. So this one is actually in pretty good condition. This car has 97,000 miles on it, so not too shabby for that kind of mileage. And as you can see, everything looks really good. Let's pop the hood. So as you can see, this car was originally an NA, and you can tell that by looking at that bump right here. Let me put this hood prop up. You can tell when a car's been swapped. One of the easy ways to tell is if it has the VVTi gear, which is under here. It has this bump in the cover. That tells you that this is a VVTi motor. It's not the factory motor in a Supra. So this is probably in a Risto or a JZS or JZX 1Z1, I think it is, or 161. But anyway, it's this was originally an NA auto car, and it's been swapped to an R154. And a lot of the stuff that's been done on it is kind of hokey. So the header is an eBay header. It's got a Borg Warner turbo. Everything in the engine bay just looks, yeah, it just needs some love. So this is one of the things that I'll be addressing. Just needs an overall cleanup and just simplification. But this video is all about the transmission and just introducing you to the car and what we're gonna do. So right there's the R154, and first gear is gone, reverse grinds. So that trans is coming out, and in will go the GR700A kit, which is the aluminum bell version of my kit. So I'm not going to get too involved on the removal of the trans part, because who needs to see that? So I'm going to be really quick with that. But one thing I do want to show you is under here, under the shifter bezel, or interior panel as I call it, you can see that, hey, look, there's a drive shaft. Everything in this car, when they did this tunnel, they just left it wide open. There's no cover to basically keep all the outside elements and exhaust and fuel fumes and everything out of the chassis, I mean out of the body of the car. So while you're driving in here, you're going to smell all that. You're going to get the heat from under there and everything. So That's why when I do these auto to manual swaps, I make this thing called a tunnel cover, and it's basically a piece of sheet metal that fits in here and bolts into 4 spots, but you have to trim out so that the T56 fits better. But I'm going to put that in this car to make this nice and sealed up. Hopefully they didn't cut back too far here to where my tunnel cover won't cover it up, but if they have gone back too far, I will I'll just have to extend it a little bit, make a little bit of sheet metal to make it work nice. One other thing I'll mention is I really don't understand why people like these transmissions. They are so clunky and hard to shift. It's like a fucking tractor shifter. No thank you. I'll show you the difference when we put the T56 in there. Okay, so here we are about an hour and a half later, and I have the trans pulled out. I have the R154 out of the car. There it is, clutch and all. And now we're ready to start the install of the trans. And the first step I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be installing the new T56 specific pilot bearing into the crank. The easiest way to install the pilot bearing is to just find a socket with a backside that is the same size as the pilot bearing outer ring. And then all you do is you stick the pilot up in place and smack the back of the socket, or the front side of the socket I should say, to get that pilot installed all the way flush. So now you can see the pilot bearing installed, and it's flush with this inner lip inside of here. And these bearings that I provide with the kit are specific to the T56. They have a larger inner diameter on the bearing than what the factory V160 or W58 or RM54 has. So make sure you install the proper pilot bearing when you're doing these installs. The clutch I'm going to be installing for this video is my favorite clutch, and it's the Tilton ST246 twin disc. So this clutch is a full face organic clutch, and what's really cool is both discs are sprung. So as you can see, there's the top disc sprung, bottom disc sprung, full face, so that it engages really nice and soft, and then it's sprung. So the great thing about a sprung clutch is that it dampens some of the engine noise. So on the 2Js, when you install a single mass flywheel like this one, most aftermarket flywheels are like this. They're not a dual mass, where they have a rubber liner in between them that dampens engine noise. That style of flywheel just doesn't work well with a performance clutch. So they're prone to failure. It actually can come apart. So basically, you go to a single mass flywheel, that removes the dampening from the engine, so you get some more noise that'll come through the clutch and then through the trans, so the engine noise can translate back through the trans and make the trans sound noisy. So on this clutch with the dual sprung disc, those springs kind of go like this and dampen some of that vibration that comes back through the trans. So this clutch is super quiet, it engages super soft, but it has a torque capacity for somewhere around like 1,000 horsepower. So it's good for like 950 torque. I think Tilton said that this clutch has actually held 1,000 torque on the dyno, but I typically kind of say like 1,000 horsepower. That way we go a little bit lower and we know where the torque capacity is going to be within range. So I'd say like around 950 torque is where I kind of limit this thing. But I mean, for a super soft street driving clutch, 1,000 horsepower, this is the way to go. It literally almost drives like stock. It feels almost like stock when you drive it. So our next step is the flywheel install, and for this clutch, I have a set of ARP flywheel bolts that are specific to the Tilton flywheel. So these are the ARP shorts is what I call them. And when we install these, we're gonna use red Loctite on them, and we're gonna go to 75 foot-pounds. The next step here is to install the clutch and the actual pressure plate itself. So what you wanna do is get the alignment tool, stick it through both discs, and have it ready, and it'll help you hold the clutch in place because this thing's pretty heavy. So you're gonna use the alignment tool to get it up and get the alignment tool in on the pilot bearing, and that'll help kind of hold the clutch up. And then you're gonna get these bolts started, and that'll hold it in place. And as you can see, this clutch is not even close to being installed. This gap here you can see needs to get sucked down. Now, as you tighten these bolts, you're gonna go in a star pattern. So just like you're putting a wheel on, you're gonna do a star pattern quarter turn at a time. So just a little bit at a time. It takes forever to do this, but you do it right and it works. So it's important to do it this way too, because this clutch is aligned by this ridge on the flywheel. So if you take this one down all the way, then it's gonna bind everything up. So as you tighten down the clutch, you wanna keep a hold of the alignment tool, and you wanna keep wiggling it and make sure it moves freely in and out as you keep tightening. So as you tighten, make a round, make sure this is still freely moving, it slides in and out real easy until you get all the way down, and then these get blue Loctite and 35 foot-pounds. So take your time on this process, wiggle the alignment tool, make sure that everything's free. It's gonna make your job a lot easier when you go to slide the trans onto the clutch. So the next step is gonna be to install the tunnel cover. And if you come out to my website and you search for tunnel conversion, you'll see the page here for this new version of the tunnel cover. This was for the old regular Magnum. This is for the Magnum F and CD09 and pretty much every other trans. So you click on this product and it's gonna give you a link to a template right here, download template. And then you're just gonna print this out and verify that the measurements are correct by, after you print it, measure this right here and make sure it's 90 millimeters and cut that out, cut around the black line, and you're gonna be good to go for the template. So here you can see I drew out, and this is the driver's side or the left-hand drive side. And you'll see that my line goes through this hole. So you are gonna cut through this right here, and this hole is gonna become gone basically. There's a little tab on the tunnel cover that I make that'll allow you to put a bolt on this side if you want to. But 3 bolts, so 1 here and 2 in the back here, will hold that tunnel cover just fine. You don't really need that, especially with the seam sealer and stuff that we'll get into later. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the cutoff wheel here, and I'm gonna cut out that hole, and then I have to make a small cut from the top side too. So the one thing I always tell people before you go do this, put a towel up over here in the interior to cover this so it doesn't throw sparks and hot stuff all through your interior. At least it'll contain it to this area as you cut. So put a towel over there and make sure it's not touching anything, and make sure all your wires are out of the way here so you don't cut through any wiring when you do this with the cutoff wheel, because you're going to be kind of doing this blind from underneath. Okay, so now you can see the square hole cut out with the pattern, and you'll notice that this should come out real easy. But you'll notice that there's this bracket for the dash, and that actually needs to be trimmed from the top side. So I'm gonna put the car back down, and I'm gonna go in here with the cutoff wheel. This is the worst part, to cut this out, but I'll show you how to do that now. So here you can see the hole after I cut and trimmed out that bracket for the dash a little bit, like an angled line there. You can see how I did that. That's gonna allow this tunnel cover here to fit up in there nice and snug. So when I put this in here now, I get it lined up with these rear bolt holes, and I have a story to go with these rear bolt holes. So if you're having a shop do this work for you, and they ever say like, oh, it took me this much longer because this was messed up, well, these 2 bolts that were in here, whoever did this, for whatever reason, I have no idea, but they cut the heads of the bolts off and left the threads down in there. So I literally had to drill these bolts out, you know, step up in size bit, step up, step up, step up, until the bolt came free and I got it out. But that took me an hour just to get those bolts out. So that's why things take longer at shops sometimes. So don't, if someone says, you know, if a shop's doing this work for you and they say, hey, this took me this much longer because this was all messed up, you know, try not to complain about that, because they're just probably being honest with you, and you always run into this bullshit when working on a car that you don't know. So here's the tunnel cover in place and fitting. You can see I got a little bit aggressive with that hole up there, so I'm going to just put a little bit of seam sealer there to fill that in. But other than that, it fits nice, and you'll never see this once I put the interior console back in place here. So this will all be hidden eventually, but for now it actually seals up the tunnel, keeps all the outside elements on the outside. So I'm going to bolt this in. It uses these 2 bolts, and then there's 1 bolt underneath on this side, and then there's this little tab here that you can use if you want. You can just put a self-tapping screw down through here. I generally don't use it. I just put it there as an option in case you feel more comfortable securing that. But with seam sealer and 3 bolts holding this thing, it's not going to go anywhere. Here you can see the tunnel cover installed from the bottom, and here is the bolt I was talking about that you install from the bottom down through. So like this. So you want to make sure you get this one started first, and then you'll go ahead and put the back 2 bolts in there, and then it takes some time. You have to go from top to bottom, but snug them all down tight. And then we're going to come around here and put seam sealer all around. You can see how I said I got a little bit aggressive there, but that'll look good once I get the seam sealer. We're going to go around and seal all this, and this is where they cut the tunnel out. You normally wouldn't see this spot. It normally would have the straight edge there, but I'll seam seal all around here, make it all sealed up and nice, and we should be good to go. So here you can see it with all the seam sealer installed. So I just got a tube of the seam sealer from AutoZone. Smooth that out, make it look good, and then after it dries, I'm just going to hit it with some black paint just to make it look good. And like I said earlier, the automatic tunnel is the only one you need to do this with. If you have a manual car, an existing manual car, you don't have to do any of this stuff. It'll all fit perfect. So this is the cast aluminum bell, and this comes with hardware, so it's all ready to go. It comes with the hardware from the trans to the bell, and then it also comes with the hardware from the bell going into the block. So these 5 large bolts are the big bolts that go into the block. They're all orientated up around the top like a rainbow. The 2 longer bolts are for the starter, and then these 2 bolts are the ones that come through the back into here from the motor side into the bell from the back. So I'm going to go ahead and install the bell now and come back. The bolts that go from the bell into the block, they take about 65 foot-pounds. So all these bolts that go in that way. The starter bolts, you can go a little bit less because it's aluminum thread, go like 55 foot-pounds. So now we just need to pick out a trans, and I have quite a few of them. So the one thing we're gonna do to this, like we do to all the Mark IV transmissions, is we're gonna take the trans, we're gonna cut the ear off a little bit on the front right side so that it fits better in the tunnel, and then we'll install the Mark IV Supra specific shifter onto it as well. So what we do in this trans is we take this ear right here and we just machine some of the edge off of it. And then for the shifter, I use the core parts from this shifter. So I use this base, but I install my billet parts into the shifter. So if you go on my website and you see that this shifter is not available, that's because I need the core. So if you do have one of these trans and you want the shifter, I can do a shifter for you. I just need your core back to use it as to build the parts into it. When you get the tilt and release bearing for me, it's going to come in a box like this, and it's going to have some added hardware. And this hardware that I provide is for the base to attach it to the trans. So go ahead and install this base. Now that our bearing is set up on the trans, pretty much ready to install this trans on the trans. So you only need like bell housing. But one of the tricks that I found over the years of doing this and here and show you how to set up the air gap really quick, because I've covered this so many times. I just want to do it really quick today. And stick it through this bracket. After you have the base installed and tightened down, that way it's so much easier. The next step is to actually go back to the car, and we're going to take a measurement from the bell housing into the clutch. Here you can see the line setup that I do, set the bearing height up, fuel line sliced down the middle, and put it over these lines. All right, so the measurement we need to take here is from the face of the bell housing into the face of the clutch fingers. But right here, we're ready to go ahead and stab this trans up onto the bell housing. And our micrometer. I measure in here from the face of this straight edge to my fingers, which is, you can see my measurement out here to the left is 69 millimeters. So that's the measurement we need to start. So our measurement is pretty much 69 millimeters on the dot. So what we want is a gap of about 1/8 of an inch or 3.5 millimeters. So I'm going to set this to 69 minus 3.5, which would be 65.5. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my bearing. So that's roughly what we need, 3.5 millimeters of air gap. You can even go 4. Sometimes I go 4, but this will get us close enough. So now we have our measurement to set up the bearing off of the back or off of the face of the trans. So basically we're taking our measurement to the finger, subtracting 3.5 millimeters, and that's going to give us our gap in here at the face of 3.5 millimeters. So now all I need to do is spin this bearing out to the point where it's about 65.5, and the way you'll check that is just by taking the straight edge across the face of the bearing like this, and then measuring from here, the edge of the straight edge, back to the face of the trans until you get to 65.5. And then one other thing you need to know is you want to have this bearing orientated or set up so that the bleeder is on the top. So you want to have the bearing set up something like this. So the bleeder's coming out the top and the feed's coming in the bottom, because that'll help push all the air out of the system. So it can either go like this or it can go like this, just as long as your bleed is on the top side. And you can see there's many different holes in this base plate where you can put this, but like I said, you want to keep it oriented so it's that way. Okay, so now that I got my bearing height set up the way I want it, you can see there is a shoulder bolt here that actually holds this from moving around, and they give you two different sizes depending on where you set up the bearing. So if you have your bearing set up way far out for like maybe a single disc clutch, then you might want to use this longer bolt. But for this one, I have enough clearance in here for the short bolt, and you want to make sure that that bolt is not actually pulling on this bearing and twisting it and making it off center. You want to make sure that it actually has free play in here. So now that I have the bearing set up, I can go ahead and put my bleeder fitting, which is right here, into my top line, and then I can go ahead and set these lines up. I'm going to put some fuel line sliced down the middle and put it over top of these lines so that they don't get chafed up from being in the trans. As you can see here, I'm starting to get this trans up and lined up. Now, one of the things I forgot to mention here is you want to have the motor leaned back. So I have this exhaust jack up under the crankshaft pulley of the motor, holding it up so that it leans the motor back and keeps it tilted back. So that way it's a lot easier to install the bell and then also to slide the trans on as well. So I'm going to go ahead and slide the trans on, and then we'll be ready to install the cross member shifter, and we're almost done. Okay, so you can see I have the trans slid on. One other thing to make sure of is you don't pinch these lines in between the bell and the front plate of the trans. This thing slid on so smooth. That's one of the nice things about these aluminum bells. Not only are they quieter, but they install super smooth. They're just a bolt-in affair, no measuring for dowel pins, and everything is like right on point as far as the tolerances go. So that trans literally slid on like butter. It was such a nice install experience right there. I'm gonna go ahead and bolt on the trans to the bell, and then I'm gonna show you a little trick with the air gap, just to make sure that everything is correct after you install it and before you bleed everything. So here's a cool little trick that you can use to check your air gap before you go through the process of bleeding, just to double check yourself. One of the nice things with this new aluminum bell is that you actually have room to work in here. So I can reach in here and I can push on the back of the bearing and slide it out towards the clutch. And now, if you look in between the bearing and the body of the bearing, you can see that sleeve and how much room there is there. That's my air gap. So right in between the silver part of the bearing that you see and the brown part of the bearing body, that is your air gap now. So you can see that I have about 1/8 of an inch, so I'm good. The bolts from the trans into the bell, 55 foot-pounds. So the last step here is to install the cross member and the prothane mount. So what I do is I install these bolts first and snug them down, get them tight, and then I leave these ones loose until I get all 6 bolts started. And then one of the important things to do here, these studs in this prothane are kind of weak. So you do not use an impact gun on those, and they take 35 foot-pounds maximum. So just be careful with those studs because they tend to crack if you use an impact gun or you over torque them. Okay, so you can see the full kit, the GR700A kit all installed, ready to go. The only thing we need to do now is drive shaft and install the shifter. And the one thing I want to mention here is the only area where it gets a little bit tight is right here on the reverse lockout solenoid. It's usually tight in the tunnel, and what you can do is take a pry bar up in there, like an 18-inch pry bar, and just kind of press out on the tunnel there, and it'll move outward. Like before I did that, it was, you know, almost dang near tight right up there. So I got about a little over 1/8 of an inch now in clearance. So you can do it, it'll work. On the manual tunnels, it shouldn't be as bad right there. You should have more room. So the last step is installing the drive shaft. So you're gonna wanna put red Loctite on these bolts. I put Loctite on all the drive shaft bolts that go into the diff because they see a lot of vibration. So red Loctite on those, and I would say about 70 foot-pounds is what we put into these bolts here. So you can see the drive shaft is now installed with the billet adapter that comes with the kit. These bolts here, red Loctite, and about 55 foot-pounds. They're really hard to get onto. You have to use a straight wrench on these because they're really tight with the yoke. The last step here, as far as the mechanical side of the thing, is to install the extension for the shifter, the billet parts that I provide. So in this bag, you'll see the short shifter handle and the 2 extension pieces, and I'll show you how those fit up now. But in order to install them, we need to take the rubber boot back off of the tunnel cover. So I'm gonna do that now, take out these with the 1/4 inch socket, and then I'll show you how to install that extension. So the way the shifter works is it has this extension piece which moves the shifter back about 1.5 inches. And one of the cool things about it is it can be positioned in pretty much any variation of 45-degree angle. So with like it turned this way, you can do it with 45-degree angles, whichever way you want it. With it turned this way, it'll work that south 45. So you could go that way, straight forward. But for the Supra, the way you install it is like this. So that's gonna be the extension piece. And then we're gonna use these flat heads, these countersunk style bolts. And I'm gonna use this red Loctite that I provide on them and torque them down to about 35 foot-pounds. So what you wanna do first though, well, after you figure out which way you wanna make this shifter set up, is you wanna install the standoff piece, which actually holds the shifter handle, onto the extension first. So you wanna remember that that's the way I want it to go. So I'm gonna take the shifter handle, I'm gonna install it on here first, and then I'm gonna put my Loctite on my bolt, tighten that down, then last I'm gonna install the shifter on there like that. All right, so now that the shifter is installed permanently, we can go ahead and reinstall the boot back over top, and it's gonna slip down over the shifter like that. And that's why that's trimmed on the boot, so that it can install easier. Okay, so now you can see the shifter handle is installed, and I wanna talk a little bit about the shifters because I make 2 different ones. So I have a longer handle, which is 6 inches, and then I have the short handle, 4 inches, which is specific to the Mark IV Supra. So all the Mark IV kits are gonna get this shorter handle because it just fits better. It looks more like OEM in the car. Now, if you look at both of these handles, you'll see that it has taper. That taper is designed to work specifically with the boot cone, and the boot cone is made to hold up the leather shift boot so that it doesn't just sag down there and look like crap. This makes the whole setup look like an OEM setup. So you'll see when the cone has the taper inside of it, goes down, it fits down tight and snug and doesn't move. And that's what allows you to make the knob tight. So you'll take the knob on here and cinch it down against the cone, and that's what makes the knob be able to get tight, and you can align the knob correctly center. So the way you do that, you install the cone, then you install the bushing onto the handle like this, and get it pretty tight, and then you take the knob and screw the knob onto the bushing. But I'm gonna do that after I put the interior panel in, because otherwise you won't get that interior panel up over the knob. So now you can see I have the knob on here, and I don't have it snugged down yet because I want to kind of show you this. So the boot is not up around the cone yet, but I have the knob on here. I'm going to tighten it down, and you can see it starts getting tight on that cone, and that'll allow you to get it to be exactly square where you want it. And you can even go tighter if you want it to be really tight. And I'll go around one more time, and now that knob is not going to move when you're trying to shift the car. So then lastly you just pull the OEM boot up around the cone and fasten the Velcro for a complete finished look. So now that looks like an OEM manual setup in a Supra, and it shifts amazing. So like I was saying, this is the short shifter, and you can kind of see how low it sits in there, but I do have this longer shifter if you would want that. It's an option. Just message me about it when you're ordering the kit and say I want the longer handle. But I use these longer handles in a lot of the other chassis, like the FT86, like the BRZ and FRS. I use this in the 240 kits, in the Z32 kits. This is used in pretty much every kit but the Mark IV Supra. So it's just the Mark IV that seems like it needs to have the lower setup in there to make it look more like a factory shifter. So one of the last pieces of the swap before we get into the wiring side is the clutch master cylinder. So on all of these T56 swaps, you need an upgraded master cylinder. The stock 5/8 bore master is not going to move enough volume to get the release bearing to fully move and release the clutch. So you need to run an upgraded master. On this car, I installed mine, and I'll show you some pictures of that and some video from the top side showing the master, but I'm not gonna do the full install of that because it's just 2 bolts to install. It's not, it takes some time to do it, but it's not hard. And I've covered it in the auto to manual side of the swap videos that I've done, so I don't really want to get into all that as far as videotaping it. So this is the Tilton clutch master cylinder setup that I sell. It comes with a billet adapter, and I don't know if I'm gonna be able to show it, but it's down in here. Yeah, there you can see it. A billet adapter to adapt the Tilton pattern to the firewall in the Toyota. And then it comes with all the other accessories needed to make this fit on the car. And then braided coated clutch line that runs down to the slave bearing, and you're all set. That's all the hydraulic system ready to go. Now, when I bleed a clutch, since I do this a lot of the times by myself, is I use this Motive power bleeder. This thing is cool. So if you work a lot by yourself and you need to bleed brakes or bleed a clutch, this thing is well worth your money. They make caps that are specific to the different master types. So they make a cap for a Willwood, they make a cap for Tilton. I own them all just because I use it for all the time. So this is something I would highly recommend if you work alone a lot, and if you don't want to have 2 people to bleed brakes, bleed the clutch. This works awesome. So here you can see the clutch pedal setup, and now I have the clevis set up, and you can see that gold rod that runs back in there, that is your adjustment on the pedal. So what you want to make sure when you set this up is that you're not overstroking the clutch, which means you're basically engaging, you have full disengagement, say at like halfway down the pedal. You want to make sure that you don't disengage it halfway down the pedal, then continue to try to push the fingers down the clutch until it bottoms out, because what that does is it weakens the diaphragm in the pressure plate over time, because you're basically pushing it further than it needs to go. So you want to adjust your pedal down so that your release point is closer to the floor, so you're not overstroking the actual pressure plate. And the opposite can also happen. So you want to make sure that you have enough stroke, and in that case you want to turn the rod, the gold rod, you want to loosen that jam nut and turn the rod and get the pedal to come more up towards the driver, and that'll give you more stroke to give you more disengagement. So almost all the cases I see where there's a disengagement issue on a clutch, it's because you're not getting enough stroke through the master, or you have air in the system. Basically, it's just because the bearing is not moving far enough to disengage the clutch. And in that case, you need to re-bleed, make sure you don't have any air in the system, or you need to adjust your pedal upward. So in this case right here, you can see this clutch, if you look at the bolt here on the end of the pedal, it's all the way out. So you know that this clutch pedal is basically adjusted all the way up. So this one should have full stroke. I might have too much, and in that case, if I do, I'm gonna wind that bolt, that threaded rod that comes out of the master, and suck the pedal down towards the floor more, so I have less throw on the pedal to move my pedal more towards the floor. And what you can do is use the pedal assembly itself or the floor itself as your stop. So you can adjust your pedal down to where it is basically full disengagement about 1 inch above the floor. So that way when you push your pedal all the way to the floor, you only get, you know, 1 inch or so past your disengagement point, and you're not overstroking the clutch too much. Hopefully that makes sense. So the one thing I want to talk about that I almost forgot about is fluid. So these trans take 3.75 quarts of fluid. And for the first 200 miles, you are going to be very easy on this trans, right? Yes, you are. Of course you are. And for those 200 miles, you just need some cheap fluid just to get you through that break-in period. And what I recommend is just some any cheapo brand of ATF Dex 3. And a lot of these newer fluids, they are compatible, backwards compatible with Dex 3. So if you just find ATF and look on the back, and on the back it should say compatible with older vehicles that require Dex 3. So that's what you want, Dexron 3 compatible fluid. After the 200-mile break-in, you should flush that fluid out, and I recommend running the Tremec MTF fluid, and I keep cases of this here in stock all the time. So these are about 90 bucks for 4 quarts, and that'll get you set up. So if you want a case of fluid with your trans kit, just remind me and I'll include that in your kit. So the last part of the install is the wiring, and with all the kits I include this BPT all-in-one harness. So what it does is it has a reverse lockout, it has the speed sensor, and then it has the reverse lights. So what you're going to do is you're going to hook up all your plugs, you're going to fasten your module so that it stays in place. I just zip tied it temporarily here for now. And then if we go up here to the front right of the trans, there is my plug for my reverse lights. And then I ran my cord, my rest of my wires up over the top of the trans, over to the other side to here, so that I can use this to splice into this existing harness. So with the Bowler all-in-one harness, it's very simple to set up. You basically just need a power and a ground to it with key on. And when you key on, you'll hear the reverse lockout click and you know that the unit is powered. Then you have 2 available output wires, a purple and yellow and a purple and white. And you can choose either one of these. And you're just going to wire that in to where your factory speed sensor wire is picked up in the transmission and is sent up to the ECU or sent up to the speedo. You're going to splice into that wire and put one of these into there. If you have any issues with the one wire not working or you're having weird stuff happen, try the other wire, because I've had that happen before where one output is kind of acting funny. Then the other 2 wires is your reverse lights. So basically you just find your existing reverse light wires and wire those 2 into your existing reverse light wiring, and that's it. It's 6 wires, super simple, and then you go into the app and control everything and adjust everything through the app on your phone. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the wiring because this car is a little bit different than your typical Supra, because it has a JZS 161, which is an Aristo motor in it. So this harness was custom built by Tweaked, and you're not going to really find this on most cars. But what all you have to do for these wiring, it's pretty simple. So you take one of the signal wires, which is one of the 2 purples, and I chose purple and white on this, and you're going to run it to your signal wire that goes back to your dash or to your ECU. So basically what happens is with this Bluetooth module, it's going to send signal out just like a typical factory trans would, and the ECU and the dash don't know any better, and they just think you have a factory trans installed here because you're translating the signal with the box. So basically this is your signal wire coming out of the all-in-one harness going into the ECU. Then you have a power wire, which is one of these 2 wires here, and that's going to 12 volts in this harness here. So I have it split between the reverse lights, which is one of the brown and red, and the power wire for the harness. So both of those are split together for to the power wire in this harness. And then the last wire is the signal for the reverse lights, and that goes to this wire. Now you'll have to like choose your wiring in your harness that you're using, because this isn't going to match up to your harness. But that's all it is. It's just you know, 5 wires and you're done. And then in this harness there's no good ground signal, so I grounded directly to the body up here with one of the little M10 bolts. So after you get everything spliced in and you're all done, I would recommend cleaning this up a little bit better than I did. This is just a temporary install for me. This whole engine and everything is going to be coming back out again sometime soon. So this is just temporary for me to be able to drive the car around and show you some things with this swap. So after you get it all done, make sure you get it all cleaned up and everything's installed securely, so nothing's going to touch exhaust. You don't want anything basically interfering or getting pinched between the body and the trans. Just make sure everything looks good and is free. So we'll put the car in reverse and we'll go back here and check. And as you can see, I have reverse lights. So now the last step is to actually fine tune the speedometer. So after you have all the wiring hooked up and you verified that it's getting speedo signal and that you got it close, what you're gonna do is you're gonna take it out for a drive. You're gonna open a GPS app like Speedbox or whatever else, what other GPS speedometer that you can find, an app on your iPhone or whatever smartphone. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna open the Bowler app too, and you're gonna fine tune your speedo until it reads exactly the same as the GPS in your app. And that's pretty much it. Then the swap is complete and you're ready to go. I'm gonna open up the Bowler app here on my phone and do a screen share of it, and then I'll show you exactly like what the settings need to be for it all to work, and it'll get you a lot closer so that you're ready for this drive. The app you're gonna download is called BPT All-in-One. You can see the logo there. Then you're going to connect to the device and you're going to go into the speedo calibration settings. Now this car was really different because I had to direct connect to the speedo, and you can see here output 2, pulse count 1, and the calibration 1.1. Now you're going to change those around, and that's going to make your speedo read correctly. You can play with those settings. Then you can go into the vehicle settings and you'll see the tire diameter and final drive. That is only used for the reverse lockout. But the one thing you want to make sure is that the pulse count for the transmission is set to 17. You don't want to change that. Then there's other settings in here that you could play with if you want, like the reverse lockout. And there's diagnostics in there as well, but you don't really need to touch any of that stuff. All the factory settings work really well. So there you can see the reverse lockout settings. And like I said, you don't really need to touch that. Anything under 4 miles an hour, it's going to unlock the reverse lockout for you. So now with my settings in the app correct and working, I can show you here now with the GPS speedo that everything is synced up and the speedo is reading correctly. With the Bluetooth harness installed, now you can see with the car at idle, if I push the clutch in, I can easily go into reverse. That easy. So I'm in reverse. You can see my reverse indicator because this is an auto to manual swap. So listen how quiet this car is. Here, this is a clutch depressed. There is like no noise in this car from the clutch or the transmission, which is pretty outstanding. And that's a combination of the aluminum bell housing dampening the noise, and then the ST246 with the dampened disc. That helps a lot. It really makes these transmissions sound really quiet compared to some of the previous setups, like with the QuickTime bell and with some of the other clutch setups. Now that we have these sprung disc and the aluminum bell, it honestly makes this setup so much better all around. Here to red light, and I'm going to show you just how easy this clutch is to drive from a stoplight. It's the softest engaging clutch that I've ever driven. It is really quite incredible. So we're gonna go ahead here, we're gonna put it in first gear, and I'm just gonna drive it out without even hitting the throttle. So there, I'm slipping the clutch out. You can see me slipping it out. There we are, I'm out, all the way out into the clutch. I'm off the clutch. I was able to slip that out without any throttle. And there you can see my speedo is working, I have everything set up. One of the things I want to talk about is this clutch setup and how quiet it is, not only just at idle, but listen to it when you try to lug it. Now, a lot of times these clutches, these multi-disc clutches would make a lot of chatter because of the flywheel noise coming back through the motor and then through the trans and kind of chattering the gear set in the trans. But right now I'm at like 2,000 RPM. I'm going to go into third and I'm going to try to lug it here, and I'm going to see if I can make noise come through the transmission. Past the lugging point, and this is the most quiet trans setup I've ever put together, and it's really a combination of the bell housing and the ST246 clutch that has the sprung disc in it. I'm gonna take it down here really low again in RPM, and then I'm in fourth gear now. Oh yeah, and check this out. Look how tight the shifter is. There's no plug in there. It's not like there's nothing, man. It just, everything is so, I don't know, this is damn near a perfect setup for me. But there you can hear a little bit of noise. But man, it is not anything bad. Like, it's not like your typical multi-disc clutch setup. This thing is like dead silent. Super happy with this overall. So here we are, 70 mile an hour, and I'm at like RPMs. So that's a little bit high RPM because of the 427 rear gear. So if you want a setup that has a little bit more of a highway gear, I would go with like the 408 NA gear, or you could even go with the TT Auto rear end. But for like a lower power, like under 500 horsepower street car, I really like the 427 gear. Thank you for watching the video. Hopefully it will help you in your install of your GR700 kit. So if you're looking for a GR700A kit, GR1000 kit, face-plated T56, whatever you're looking for, I keep it all in stock here. I specialize in the import chassis, so the S14, S13, Supra. So if you're looking for a kit, like you want to do an auto to manual kit and a Mark IV Supra, left-hand drive, right-hand drive, I have everything you need. The pedal assemblies for left-hand drive and right-hand drive cars, I keep it all in stock. Drive shafts, bell housing, clutches, basically everything you need to do a T56 swap into your car. So if you want to quote on a car, go out to my website, grannisracing.com/quote, and I'll work you up pricing right through that form. Just fill out the form and I'll get back to you. If you're looking to see what kits I offer, go to grannisracing.com/kits and you'll see all the kits that I offer. But I also offer universal kits. So if you're looking for a 2J swap in like a Tacoma truck or something like that, I can provide you with a bell and a clutch and a trans. I just maybe not be able to provide you with the cross member to make it a bolt-in setup. So like I said, hopefully this helped you with the install. I did that car basically in about 12 hours total of labor time. So from start to finish, wiring, and I had some other little miscellaneous things that I cleaned up, like the power steering pump needed change and stuff like that I did. But it was a really quick swap, and these are pretty straightforward swaps. Everything's bolt in. So if you're looking for a kit, hit me up.